You can spend your entire life explaining who you are and still feel completely invisible. It is a painful paradox to crave connection, while every conversation feels like a failure. Psychology suggests that chronic misunderstanding often stems from a deep internal misalignment. This usually happens when your private logic does not match the social signals you send. Imagine sharing a deeply personal story only for a friend to offer a shallow joke. You feel a sudden sting of rejection because they miss the point entirely. Cognitive psychology calls this the illusion of transparency, where we assume our feelings are obvious. But the truth is that people cannot read your mind, they only see your behavior. When they misread you, your natural instinct is to pull back and stop trying. Eventually, being the person nobody gets becomes your primary identity. For many, this feeling of being a mystery serves as a protective psychological shield. If nobody can truly see you, then nobody can truly reject the real you. But the very wall you built for safety is now what keeps you isolated. Why does this pattern start, and why is it so incredibly hard to break? To find the answer, we have to look back at how you first learned to be seen. Living with a constant sense of being misunderstood carries a heavy, invisible cost in your daily life. Psychology shows this often starts with what is called anxious-preoccupied attachment. This means your early relationships taught you that emotional connection is fragile and inconsistent. If your caregivers were distracted or unavailable, you might have felt like you had to scream just to be seen. You learned early on that your inner world wasn't worth their attention unless you forced it upon them. Think back to time you shared something vital, only to be met with a cold, indifferent shrug. Over time, these moments create a deep expectation that the people in your life will eventually fail you. We often project these old wounds onto our current friends, partners, and colleagues without realizing it. You start scanning every conversation for signs that the other person is checking out mentally. Because you expect to be ignored, you might stop trying to be clear and pull away entirely. Or you do the opposite and become hypervocal, over-explaining every thought to ensure you are heard. This creates a self-fulfilling prophecy, where that intensity actually drives other people away. When they pull back, it feels like proof that no one will ever truly understand the real you. This is actually a defensive loop designed to protect you from the pain of being abandoned. By remaining misunderstood, you can avoid the terrifying risk of being fully seen and judged. You might be subconsciously choosing the familiar ache of loneliness over the scary risk of rejection. This mindset keeps you trapped, searching for a perfect listener who simply does not exist. You then feel resentful toward others for failing a test they didn't even know they were taking. But the harder you try to force understanding through words alone, the more you confuse those you love. Notice if you often feel the urge to keep talking even after you've made your point. Psychology calls this circular clarifying, where we use excessive detail to prevent any possible misinterpretation. It stems from a deep fear that one wrong word will lead to a total disconnection. Think about the last time you told a friend you were too tired to hang out. Instead of stopping at no, you likely spend 10 minutes justifying your exact energy levels. You provide footnotes for your feelings because you're terrified they won't believe your simple truth. Research suggests this happens when we prioritize being technically precise over being understood. You become so focused on the facts that you lose the emotional connection to the listener. Ironically, this flood of information makes it much harder for others to follow your lead. They get buried in the data and miss the actual heart of your message. When they look confused, you assume you haven't been clear enough yet. So you add even more layers of explanation, which only pushes them further away. This creates a feedback loop where your defense mechanism becomes the thing that isolates you. Cognitive psychology notes that we do this to regain control over how we are perceived. It is exhausting to curate every sentence before it even leaves your mouth. You end up leaving the conversation feeling more alone than when it began. The more you talk, the harder it is for them to see the person behind the words. But this friction isn't just about volume, it's also about a hidden need to be technically right. The more you insist on being perfectly understood, the further people seem to drift away. Psychology shows that we often prioritize technical accuracy over emotional connection during a conflict. This usually stems from a deep fear that any slight misinterpretation is a form of rejection. You might treat your feelings like a legal deposition that must be recorded with total precision. If a partner says they feel ignored, you might spend an hour debating the word ignored. You aren't trying to be difficult, but you are desperate to ensure the truth is captured. Psychology calls this a high need for cognitive closure, which is an intense desire for certainty. It means you cannot rest until the other person sees the exact shade of your intent. But while you are busy correcting their vocabulary, you are missing their emotional plea. Others may eventually stop trying to understand you because the emotional cost is too high. They feel like they are walking through a minefield of definitions rather than having a conversation. This obsession with being right about yourself, ironically, makes you feel more alone. You start to view every conversation as a potential site for a new misunderstanding. Eventually, you might stop sharing altogether just to avoid the pain of being half seen. This creates a self-fulfilling prophecy where you remain a mystery to protect yourself from flaws. You end up standing behind a wall of facts, wondering why no one can feel your heart. However, there is a hidden reason why you might actually prefer this wall to being known. What if staying misunderstood is actually a strategic choice your brain makes to keep you safe? Psychology shows that being a mystery can function as a powerful emotional defense mechanism. The logic is simple. If no one truly knows you, then no one can truly reject you. Cognitive psychology calls this self-handicapping, which means creating obstacles to prevent a real evaluation of yourself. Imagine you are at a party and someone asks about your deepest passions. Instead of being honest, you give a vague answer that leaves them guessing your true intent. You might walk away feeling lonely, but you also feel a strange sense of relief. That relief comes from knowing your true self is still tucked away where it stays protected. However, the cost of this safety is living your life behind an invisible glass wall. You can see the warmth of connection, but you cannot feel the actual heat of it. Over time, this habit of hiding makes you feel like an alien in your own life. When you complain that no one understands you, it might even be a subconscious boast. It frames you as someone too complex or too deep for the average person to grasp. You use this uniqueness as a badge of honor to cover up the fear of being ordinary. But if you are always the misunderstood genius in the room, you ultimately stay alone. You end up trading real intimacy for a sense of untouchable intellectual safety. True connection requires the risk of being seen as flawed, simple, and human. Until you drop the mystery, the wall between you and the world will only grow taller. This constant hiding often leads to a heavy internal toll that few people ever see. Over time, you might notice that the person the world sees is actually a carefully crafted character. Psychology calls this the false self, a protective version of you designed to prevent rejection. This mask is built on the belief that your true thoughts are just too messy for others to handle. You might find yourself at a dinner party, nodding along to opinions you secretly despise. In these moments, you are constantly editing your jokes and tone to stay likable. Researchers call this self-silencing, which is essentially trading your truth for a sense of safety. The deep irony here is that even when you are accepted, it never feels like a victory. Instead, you feel more alone because you know they are only cheering for the mask. This performance reinforces the painful idea that the real you is fundamentally unacceptable. Maintaining this act is physically draining and places a heavy burden on your nervous system. You become hypervigilant, scanning every face in the room to see if your act is still working. Eventually, you might even lose touch with what you actually think or feel deep down. You end up acting as a mirror for others rather than being a person with your own light. This habit guarantees you will feel misunderstood because you never actually showed up to the conversation. The constant feeling of being unseen is simply the natural result of hiding behind a script. You might even start to resent others for not knowing a person you haven't introduced yet. Breaking this cycle requires a difficult shift from trying to be impressive to being authentic. That shift feels dangerous because it means finally risking the very judgment you have spent years avoiding. You might believe that the only way to be safe is for everyone to understand you perfectly. Psychology suggests we demand this total clarity as a way to avoid the sting of judgment. We hope that if they just saw our reasons, they wouldn't find any flaws in our character. But waiting for someone to get you perfectly is like waiting for a storm to stop before leaving. You end up staying inside your own head while the world moves on without you. Real connection doesn't actually require two people to share the exact same perspective. True intimacy requires radical vulnerability, or the courage to be seen before you are explained. This means showing your feelings, even when you don't have the perfect words to justify them. When you stop over-explaining, you finally give people the space to simply be with you. You might find that people are more willing to accept you than they are to analyze you. It feels risky because you lose the safety of being a mysterious, unreadable puzzle. Yet that loss of control is exactly where a sense of true belonging begins to grow. Ask yourself if you would rather be accurately filed away or warmly embraced by others. Ultimately, the truth is that you don't need to be fully understood to be deeply loved.